So, I apologise for my lack of content recently. I've been incredibly busy with university work and sorting out my trip to China this Christmas, of which hopefully I'll vlog, although I won't be able to upload till I get back, because for those of you who don't know, YouTube is blocked in China. But now that most of my deadlines are done, at least for this milestone, I've still got some for Christmas and things like that, so there may be another dip in content around that time. But hopefully for now I'll get back to at least one video a week. If I have the time, 2 videos a week, but I can't guarantee that at this point. With that said, enjoy the video. So, Halo, at least for Halo 5, with the introduction of its quote-unquote arena multiplayer system, has been claiming that it's an arena shooter. And for those of you who don't know what an arena shooter is, the definition of an arena shooter is a shooter that focuses on dodging and aerial combat on maps with much more vertical space. In arena shooters, there are often a lot more projectile weapons like rocket launchers. Now, while Halo does have a lot of projectile weapons, most of the plasma weapons are all projectile, the rocket launchers, that sort of thing, it doesn't really fit the role as an arena shooter, where an arena shooter is normally a lot more fast-paced. Halo doesn't really have that. It has a really high time to kill, it has things like vehicles which you don't see in the classic arena shooters. And I'm not saying that it's 100% not an arena shooter, but to me it feels more like a Twitch shooter, something closer to CS or Call of Duty, in which it's not about movement and positioning on maps, and it's more about the gunplay itself. Which is not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. Halo 5's gunplay, at least in multiplayer, is some of the best console gunplay I've seen in a while. It's fluid, it's dynamic, it works really well, it's for the most part really well balanced. But it's not an actual arena shooter. It's a shooter that takes a lot of arena shooter elements, don't get me wrong. But it's not a classic arena shooter. Doom, the latest Doom, tried to emulate an arena shooter with its multiplayer, but again fell into the same trap as Halo, where it took a lot of things from arena shooters but didn't keep the core feel of an arena shooter. It's a lot closer than Halo is. You've got the really high base movement speed, there's no sprinting, there's things like that. But it's not a true arena shooter. Now, if we want a real arena shooter experience, the best bet, especially on PC, is the current Unreal Tournament. Unreal Tournament is one of, along with Quake, the original arena shooters. If there's a game you want to copy to make an arena shooter, it should either be Quake or Unreal Tournament. Now, for those of you who don't know, the latest Unreal Tournament, the one that's currently in development, dubbed by fans as UT4 because it's on Unreal Engine 4, is currently in community development. And for those of you that are interested in level design and building spaces for players to play in, this may be something for you to look at, because anyone can download their branch of UE4 and build levels for Unreal Tournament. But that's not really what I'm here for. The one thing that Unreal Tournament and most actual arena shooters do that games like Halo don't, and this was for the most part a console limitation due to controllers back in the day, albeit people have come up with ways around this now, but it's the weapon systems. Now, I was going to bang on about how I recreated the Halo weapon system in UE4 and that sort of thing, but I found that that topic would be way too technical and not as interesting as it could be. So I figured I'd do a comparison between the real OG arena shooter weapon system and the weapon system that's applied in most console games and Halo. So I'll start with Halo. I think everybody watching is a fan of Halo, for the most part, so you'll all know the Halo weapon system. It's not really changed since Halo 1, there may have been a few tweaks here and there, but for the most part it's the same. There are 2 weapons, 2 usable weapons, that a player can hold at any time. They don't have to be limited to any sort of slot or anything like that. You can have 2 of any weapon at any time. Now, in games like Unreal Tournament, you can have one of each weapon. There's no limit to how many weapons you can carry. And each weapon occupies its own slot. So on a keyboard, it goes from 1 to 9. Each weapon will always fill a slot from 1 to 9, and it will always be that same slot whenever you play. For example, I think it's 8 is always the rocket launcher in the new Unreal Tournament. If you have the rocket launcher on you and you want to access it from anywhere, you press the 8 key on the keyboard, you will equip the rocket launcher. And that is one of the main differences between, in my opinion, a real arena shooter and a game that takes a lot of inspiration from an arena shooter. And it's one of those things that you can see has been built for console users. They can switch between every weapon they have with the press of a button. If you look at games like Counter-Strike, you can do a similar sort of thing with the Q key. If you've got quick weapon switch turned on, which allows you to switch between what you have now and the last thing you were using. But they still have grenades, a knife, and Zeus on separate slots, because it's easier to access them with the scroll wheel than it is to press a button to cycle through them all in something, say, Borderlands style. Admittedly, they fixed that with the D-pad, which was quite a good way of doing it, in a way that I could see real arena shooters come to console. But it still doesn't seem as efficient a system as they could have. And I think this is just a limitation of controllers, rather than keyboard and mouse for shooters. Now, I'm quite biased here because I much prefer a keyboard and mouse over a controller any day of the week. But I've played Halo somewhat competitively with a controller, not like HCS standards or anything, but there was a little tournament at EGX that myself, Ice Spiteful, and 2 other guys, Jasper and Jomo Man, I think his name was, won. And I played with a controller there. I didn't do very well, because I'm definitely not used to aiming with sticks. But I managed it. Now, on to quite possibly one of the biggest issues with bringing a real arena shooter to a console. And that's aiming. Now, don't get me wrong, thumbsticks are not bad for aiming, especially for those that can use them. There are people out there that could beat me at Counter-Strike playing with a controller if they tried. There are some people that are just that good. But as a general rule, keyboard and mouse is better for first-person shooters. Because one, you have access to way more options as far as binding things and having the ability to play the way you want to. If you don't want to use WSAND in Counter-Strike, you can use the arrow keys if you're left-handed and use the mouse with your left hand. That sort of thing you just don't see with a controller, and they try and design controllers to be as simple as possible but still provide enough functionality. And that enough functionality is very, very use case specific. Look at Overwatch on the Xbox One. That's, again, more of a hero shooter than an arena shooter. But it definitely suffers from not enough buttons. Think Rainbow Six Siege as well. With Rainbow Six Siege on the Xbox One, you can't lean your character left and right without being scoped in, because the buttons are used for something else when you're not scoped in. And it's just a lack of options that sort of limit what you can and cannot do on a console. They may try their hardest to get it as best as they can, but like those two options, but like with those two scenarios there, they can't do it perfectly if there is not enough physical buttons. Now, the Elite controllers and things like that could remedy this if the paddles were considered their own button and not just remappings of other buttons. You could have games that took advantage of the Elite controller's 4 paddles. So think you could have Unreal Tournament on the Xbox One with those paddles and have the paddles to switch different weapons. Have 4 guns on the back and then with the D-pad. But then people who don't like playing with the paddles will complain saying, oh well, I can't play it without the paddles. Or it's severely limited without the paddles. And it's just the interaction method with consoles that, in my opinion, limits its ability to play certain games. Look at games like Star Citizen. That game will never come to consoles. If it does, I'll eat a fucking shoe. And one of the reasons is because you need an entire keyboard to play the game. There are so many options and things that you need to be doing and changing at a moment's notice. The only way you could play it on a console is with some sort of proprietary control panel that you have in front of you, and you know, things like that will cost way more than a game that's already very expensive. Now I know I've rambled on a little bit, so I'm gonna sort of end the video here. What do you guys think about input methods, whether it be controller, keyboard and mouse, motion controls, Kinect, whatever? What do you think about those being used on consoles and how they can limit certain games being able to be played? And what do you guys also think about Halo not being a real arena shooter? Leave us a comment in the comment section below, and leave a like if you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, stay classy.